Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host. For today, he's my best friend, Mark Tipton.
Oh, best friend. Well, that's certainly very nice. I appreciate that. And it's something we see in professional wrestling these days. Best friends are a thing. We won't go necessarily into that particular team, but it does bring us to the subject that we want to talk about on this podcast, the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast. And that is the subject of friendship and the importance that friendships plays in the success, or maybe not, maybe less than success, in the world of professional wrestling.
Absolutely. Friendships obviously, have a huge bearing on professional wrestling and just business in general. And professional wrestling is no different. You tend to want to help out your buddies, to help out your friends. You get them a job, get them to do this. They'd be good for this spot. It's just human nature to do stuff like that. And over the years, we've seen a lot of wrestling friendships. Some of them, fruitful. Some of them eventually demise. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, the impact on the business is evident.
It certainly is. Now, this is, and based on the direction we're going, it's certainly something that I think we're going to get back into something we've discussed before, and that's the concept of wrestling politics. When you talk about getting a guy in, or something, some kind of phrase along that nature. But when you proposed this subject and said, "Hey, let's talk about this," and I stopped and thought about it, there are a couple of kind of cliches that I've heard about friendships in the world of professional wrestling, and
right.
and I'll try to refer to them and let you give your take. One of them was that if you leave, I've heard wrestlers, I want to say it's Ric Flair among the others, if you leave this business and you have 5 real friends, or you can count the number of real friends that you have in this business on one hand, you should consider yourself lucky.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. We have a lot of acquaintances and not many friends. You know what I mean? I've been very fortunate and lucky. There's a lot of guys that I consider, to be very close with, and guys that I genuinely care about their well-being and their livelihood and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, for the most part though, it's a dog-eat-dog world. You know what I mean? And sometimes professional wrestling can be a cutthroat business, and either someone likes you or they don't. And sometimes that's what boils down to your opportunities, is who is willing to say that they know you and like you.
Okay. Well, it kind of goes along with something I heard in the entertainment field, is that they call it show business, not show friends.
That's a good
Because
one.
ultimately, you're competing. You're competing to get an opportunity to be a part of a roster or on a show, or get a higher spot on the show. And those sorts of things, and that necessarily does not go well with being best buds.
Yeah, and what you're talking about really, to me, that more came about with the adventation of national television wrestling, because then all of a sudden it became, well, there's only so many spots available to be a nationally recognized professional wrestler. You know what I mean? So those, instead of having 30 territories with a roster full of 15 guys, we had 2 rosters with maybe 30, 40 guys. So, I mean, just do the math there alone. You can see how many guys were left in the cold on that. So I think it became more cutthroat after the territories went out, because there was less spots, and that's just, once again, human nature. So guys were cutting each other's throat, or if anything, trying to protect their spots.
Yeah, And that is one of the downsides of the territory um, era going away, because when you nationalize it, and generally the larger companies, we've seen in WWE how they've been diminishing the size of their roster rather significantly lately. Excuse me, and names that surprise me, quite a bit to see. Uh, I guess, and I'll try to get in the. What I'll do is just off the top, we'll get in the other quote, because when you mention national companies, that led me right to my other quote.
Sure.
The other famous quote I heard that I believe was put forward by Triple H was that in this business, you can make friends or you can make money, but you can't necessarily make both. It kind of goes hand in hand with the concept we've been talking about, but it's a different way to say it, I suppose.
Yeah, I actually heard Scott Hall say it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Scott Hall had said,
Well,
I think he said Hogan had told him this. It was like, you can either make friends or you can make money.
okay.
And Scott Hall said, well, I've already got some friends. I'd like to make the money.
All right.
So, and that kind of leads us to actually where I kind of want to start with this is probably the most famous friendships in wrestling is the Clique. You know what I mean? And their impact on the business is, well documented, good and bad. But, for those of you who don't know, obviously the Clique were Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Six Pac, and then adjacently, we still had Justin Credible too.
Yes.
Because he was out on Montoya
at the time.
And he ran with him quite a bit too.
All right.
So and if you look at all those guys, they all, with the exception of Nash, obviously, they all pretty much worked alike. You know what I mean? There was a very similarity to the way, very fast-paced, athletic kind of style that they did. Like I always said, Justin Credible was, the Clique version the ECW version of Shawn Michaels at that time, because he was having, that kind of matches, I thought.
Right.
Especially with Jerry Lynn and guys like that.
Certainly.
But yeah, the Clique itself, they've been notorious for, because apparently, all Hogan cared about was Hogan.
Well, that's pretty, I think that's accepted.
Yeah,
Yes.
so like when Hogan's era kind of ended and they were ushering in this new era of whatever, well, then the Clique kind of took over as, well, we care about all of our buddies. So they started trying to get each other over and get each other in the spots and working with each other. And that's kind of what happened. And then eventually I've heard stories that they were the ones actually writing TV at one point. You know what I mean? And like they were the ones that would go to Vince and go, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. Or they would, and there's stories too where they've unjustly tried to undercut a man for making a living by getting him fired or just because they didn't like his attitude. You know what I mean? So like there's just a lot of things like that surrounding the Clique, obviously.
Yeah, I have heard a few things of that nature. I guess one of the things when we talk about the Clique that kind of came to mind for me is, and I'll see if you heard these things as well, is I've heard them describe in interviews how they began to do something that traditionally wasn't done, is that they would discuss what they were being paid with each other.
Yeah,
and among their friendship and their group, and they kind of use that information to work against the office, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is that something you believe in, or
you've
heard?
I heard that too, and that's a big no-no in the business because and here's the thing too, and once again comes down to human nature. We're going to be talking about human nature a lot in this episode, I think, but like basically, if me and you are working in the same place, you know what I mean, and I find out you made $100,000 and I made 20, I'm going to be mad, right? There's no way around it. But at the same time, if I wouldn't have known that information, right, I would have been happy with my 20,000.
Right.
Right?
Because that was the deal you had accepted.
Because that's the deal I had accepted, right? Or I knew what was, roundabout what was coming, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, the Clique themselves, they go, well, I got $50,000 for this pay-per-view. I only got 15.
Right.
You know what I mean? Stuff like that. And then that's when they start going to Vince like, oh, what about this? And that's when guaranteed money started getting kind of close. Not guaranteed. Vince never really guaranteed, but he did
a downside?
A low side down.
Okay.
Yeah.
The downside is the word I've always heard.
The downside guarantee.
Okay.
You're going to make no less than this.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And you'll have potential to make this. You know what I mean?
Well, like when you're running down that roster of the group. I mean, let me just say you have Shawn Michaels in that group, and then you have the other guys. And I can imagine Shawn Michaels would have been making much more than most of the other gentlemen involved there at that time. Anyway,
You would think, but at the same time,
I don't
you
know.
got to think. No, that remember Kevin Nash was actually the champion before Shawn.
Yes.
So like, and it's so ridiculous. Like when Kevin Nash won the Intercontinental title, I heard that he had less than 300 matches. And from a wrestling standpoint, that's ludicrous, right? That a guy that only had 300 matches made it to that top of the business in that light. So that, of course, and that goes with it too. I'm sure Shawn may have been the other way around. Like, Nash may be getting more money than Shawn, and Shawn's like, well, I'm the one that's been here
Right.
for a decade,
I've got the seniority, etc.
Right, and I'm the one that taught you how to work.
Right.
That becomes a thing too. So.
Right, because Nash kind of came in as Shawn Michaels heavy or whatever.
Yep.
Well, in all honesty, the one thing that brings to mind is being a larger individual does pay benefits, and so that's something to keep in mind. But having that information about what each other is getting, that gives them an advantage in negotiating with Vince in this case, as well as I would suppose they were talking about what offers they would get from other companies when their contracts came up. I would suppose.
Yeah, and that's you gotta understand. I'm coming at this from the promoter side now. Like,
Sure.
if you had asked me the same question 10 years ago, I'd been like, oh yeah, it's great that they talked about their money. They should have blah blah blah. Now I don't believe that. Like, I'm steadfast in the belief that if you agree you're going to do it for this price, then that's on you. You know what I mean? You can go up or you go down. I don't care, but it could determine whether I have a spot for you or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like, and to say, well, so and so makes this, and I should make that. Well, you had no problem with that until you found out he made that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You were doing all this work for this.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So I mean, what does it matter now? So once again, that's the difference between being a wrestling mindset and then a promoter mindset.
Well, sure, and people do look at things differently, but I think it is one of the largest impacts of friendships in this case, among the talent, and the effect it had on professional wrestling. It affected the WWE, and from what I can tell, it had a tremendous impact on WCW.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because they were the ones that actually guaranteed.
Yes.
And like, that was the big thing for Scott Hall. He said was when he left WWE, he was like, well, I'm going to make more money and I'm going to do less dates.
Right.
So I mean, it was kind of a no-brainer for him. He's like, that makes sense,
Right.
So,
And that, I mean, in a purely economic sense, hey, a bigger payday for less, effort and wear and tear on your body, so to speak. That certainly makes a lot of sense in that case. Although I will, as a fan, it doesn't thrill me to hear wrestlers say things like that.
right.
Yeah, but because I'm looking for a guy who's out there, and you want to tell me he's out there to entertain everybody, and that's his foremost goal, even if it's not the truth. I like to hear it anyway.
Ignorance is bliss on that one, right?
Yes, sometimes it certainly is. And I guess when we talk about the Clique, I didn't know if you want to get into this, but they made theirs very public, and the what was it, the bow or the encore they did at Madison Square Garden.
Curtain call.
The curtain call, thank you. The phrase left my mind. And we saw a very public display, which in the minds of many at the time kind of exposed the business.
Yeah, I was obviously, I'm still not a fan of that at all. And that's, once again, it's coming from a promoter / booker mindset. Like, if you've created this illusion that this guy's good and this guy's evil and this is a hero and this is your villain, and then all of a sudden everyone just kind of shits on it and says, well, it's actually all phony, guys. Good night.
Well, yeah. And really, you've implied these guys have issues with each other.
Right.
And they kind of remind the audience, oh, no, not so much.
Not so much. We're actually just, acting.
Yeah, we're going to ride together in the car on the way out.
Yeah. It's that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, even, it sounds ludicrous to a lot of wrestlers nowadays, but I don't even want a heel and a baby face going to the same restaurant.
Certainly.
You know what I mean? Like, I still adamantly, tell my roster that, like, hey, no, you can't go eat. You can't eat with us
Right.
because you're this and I'm that, and it would ruin our whole suspension of disbelief. I want people to believe everything we do, and that's just part of it.
Well, thank you. That's one of the things on which you and I certainly agree. I guess the word is kayfabe, and I'm certainly a fan of it. Uh,
So
there are others examples that we certainly I think you want to get into.
yeah, since we talked about the Click, I think the next place we need to go is the Bone Street Crew.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm trying to remember the Bone Street Creek. Now, if I'm not mistaken, was that the group that the Undertaker was involved with?
Yeah, so like as the Click's doing all this kind of backstabbing behind the back kind of stuff, the Bone Street Crew is basically just the guys like to hang out, party, and
Right.
kind of keep to themselves. I believe. I don't think they cause any kind of turmoil backstage, but it was it was Undertaker, it was Yokozuna, it was Rikishi, it was Godfather. When he was Kama Mustafa. And I think that was mainly it. Midian. Midian was another one that was Neck and Midian. For those of you who might remember him. And, basically like that. And the Undertaker's whole persona was that he didn't put anyone over as far as he didn't react to anybody. Like if someone, he just was very Mr. Cool-headed, calm, whatever. You know what I mean? But everyone knew he meant business and had the respect. So that was kind of the extension of the Bone Street Crew is like, or is it Bone Street or Bone Skull? I don't know. I can't remember.
Yeah, I remember it's BSK, but I don't.
Yeah. That's because it's tattoo.
Tattoo,
yeah.
yes.
But yeah, I mean that was another notable one, obviously. I think another one we need to talk about is the friendship between Arn Anderson and Ric Flair.
Yes. Certainly a significant one with their role with the Horsemen and the role they played in professional wrestling, of course, largely in WCW, but they certainly had a tremendous impact on that company and the wrestling business in general.
Yeah, and I mean it's just and one of those things too, like Flair openly crying when Arn's giving his speech, his retirement speech. Obviously, they cared a lot for each other and were great friends at one time. I heard Arn Anderson say recently on his podcast that, when they got to WWE and like Arn was in an agent role and then Flair was a talent, then their relationship kind of changed and they just kind of basically like drifted apart over the years and they're just not as close as they once were.
Well, yeah, but things changed dramatically.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was supposed to be your best friend and all of a sudden, and I can understand that. One guy's part of the office. One guy's it's hard to have those relationships, but Ric Flair obviously has had his issues over the years with a multitude of things, money and no showing dates and things like that. And I'm sure that weighs heavy on a guy like Arn, who
Right.
I never heard of Ric Flair doing anything shady in the territory days. It wasn't until he started doing independent bookings that he started taking advantage of people. You know what I mean? So I can understand where Arn kind of distanced himself from Flair in that sense.
Right. Well, that's certainly kind of thing he would not want to be associated with. I've always, at least from the outward appearances, Arn always seemed to be a strictly business kind of guy, and so those sorts of things, and sometimes naching is not necessarily professional.
Right. Another one that actually should be a pretty hot topic right now, considering we are less than 24 hours removed from the debut of CM Punk on AEW.
Who was that?
CM Punk.
I hadn't heard.
You hadn't heard?
I hadn't heard. Yeah.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised like a little
I'm
turtle.
a terrible liar.
A turtle didn't come knock on your door and let you know.
I am a terrible liar.
But here's one of my big questions for it is CM Punk and Colt Cabana, are they still friends? Have they made up?
I don't think so. And actually, I think Punk kind of referenced that. He said there were people in this locker room he had scores to settle with.
I didn't even put that together, but that makes sense.
And, I started thinking about, who could he possibly be referencing? And that one did come to my mind.
I was thinking like Jericho. I was just thinking,
I was
thinking working-wise.
Yeah, and that certainly makes sense. And in all honesty, I don't know that a match between the two will ever happen. I don't I since given the nature of their dispute and the lengths it went to, I don't think I would put if I'm Tony Khan or whoever is in charge of over there. I don't think I would involve them with each other too much.
No. And like I said, we don't know. Maybe they hash it out and everything's fine.
And it may be.
It may be, but it is
But things got
it is
legal.
interesting.
Well, when things get legal,
Yeah. Well, and that just goes.
that's serious.
Yeah, and it was so public.
Yes.
Because obviously, Cabana gave Punk a forum to gripe about the WWE thing, and became one of the most listened to things
Absolutely.
in wrestling. And then all of a sudden, well, if we get in trouble, Punk said, well, I'll take care of you.
Right.
Make sure that I take care of your legal costs.
And allegedly that didn't happen.
Allegedly, he basically said, no, I'm not going to do that.
That was the point of the dispute. And,
right.
And apparently it did, push came to shove, and apparently the belief in Punk, according to Colt Cabana's side, was not what he thought it was.
Right.
I understand, but no, I do understand that. And, I guess CM Punk might be the opposite, the kind of the reverse case. He has always been a person at admitting, full disclosure, I am quite a CM Punk fan. I was very thrilled to see him return to pro wrestling, the place he'd been away from since 2005. And so it did thrill me that, but he has a reputation as being difficult to get along with. And it certainly led me to believe that he has very few friends in the business.
Yeah, from what I understand, he's an acquired taste. Either you love him or you don't. You know what I mean? And I can completely relate with that. But at the same time, you have to have some kind of decorum when you're working with people. You know what I mean? About, being professional and stuff like that. So I hope it's not an issue for AEW because, like I said, they hit a home run last night, in my opinion. You know what I mean? But like I said on my Facebook today, now they have what I call the burden of booking, because now it's not just good enough to have a moment. You gotta follow through. Now you gotta, make it happen. You know what I mean?
Well, and that was the thing that was interesting to me is in his little speech there, that depending on how much stock you want to put into it, one of the things he mentioned prominently was working with younger talent, which is certainly a concept that has not always been. Well, we talked about people protecting their spot.
Right.
And that's something that's not always been prominent in professional wrestling. But in AEW, I've seen several instances. For instance, Sting was standing next to Darby Allin up in the rafters.
Right.
And so
the thing that I didn't like about last night, like I said, they hit a home run. I don't want to take anything away from it. I want people to think I'm, just knocking a knock. But if you've got, I told everybody, when CM Punk shows up on that television, he automatically becomes the biggest babyface in professional wrestling, period. Right? So my question is, if you're booking the biggest babyface in wrestling, why put him against another babyface for his first outing? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, it would have been so much better to have MJF.
Well, and I think, I'm trying to remember, when we discussed CM Punk before, I think I mentioned imagine MJF in the ring and Cult of Personality hits.
Yeah.
And Cult of Personality hit. The ring was empty at the time, but now Darby is in a tremendous kind of a catch-22.
Yeah.
He is not going to be cheered on September 5th.
Not mostly, no. I mean, and that's the thing with baby matches. They kind of split the audience. Like there's no real emotional investment in it because you like both guys, so you don't really care who wins and who loses,
right?
Necessarily. So I just think that puts them in a bad position. Like I said, wrestling to me always most time needs to be good versus evil. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So like, how great would it have been returning CM Punk 7 years gone, and all of a sudden he comes back to face some dastardly heel. I don't know who it could have been, but MJF is the first one that comes to mind because to me he's one of the only real heels in wrestling left.
Right.
So that would be one issue.
Right. Well, and I think his heel. Well, this is a sidetrack. I thought it was evidence on Wednesday when he managed to get the audience to sing Chris Jericho to the ring because they were doing it mostly to spite him.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and that was because they sing it anyway. So
right.
It's ingenious to go, well, if we just turn the music off, I wonder if they'll still sing it.
Right. He specifically said, and I thought, I'm really going to sidetrack you here. I thought it was a bit of a daring move on their part because ultimately getting a group of human beings to do something is like herding cats.
Yeah.
And you're taking a chance when you turn that music off that the audience will be able to get together and in unison sing the song clearly so it would come across on television.
Yeah.
It worked out, but even as Chris Jericho came out the ramp, I thought there was a look on his face like he wasn't sure this was going to happen.
Right.
He,
I actually think it was Jericho's idea. I don't think it was MJF's idea.
right.
So I think that it was, like I said, that was another really cool moment. You know, AEW's doing a lot of cool
Right.
moments.
Twice in 48 hours, they gave me, well, this is fan talking.
Yeah.
Twice in 48 hours, I got goosebumps watching AEW programming.
Yeah. I mean, and like I said, it was a great moment for wrestling, but now it's where do we go from here?
Right.
Because now you have to follow through.
Right, and we do definitely need to get back to the subject. I apologize. The CM Punk is on my mind.
Sure. Let's get to.
Well, I guess we mentioned Hogan earlier.
That's
Do
what
you-
I was thinking.
Okay.
Go Hogan. Hogan and Brutus Beefcake were the one I wanted to start with because Hogan and Brutus, you know, they grew up together apparently. You know what I mean? Met each other very early on. Matter of fact, Brutus Beefcake, one of his original wrestling names was Dizzy Hogan, and they were the Hogan brothers or whatever.
Oh,
it
I
was.
did not realize that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was like in Alabama or
Oh,
something. It was
okay.
somewhere obscure, but so and they've had a you know wherever Hogan was, Brutus
Basically, certainly made his way there.
Brutus was there, and sometimes in a not a prominent role, but he had a job and made
Right,
and
there
made a
was
living.
The Zodiac and
The Booty
Disciple.
Man,
I think it was a disciple or something.
the Booty Man.
Oh, yeah, the Booty Man. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that one just slipped my mind.
You
yeah.
forgot about that one?
Yeah.
I did not.
Maybe I blacked that
Now
one
the
out.
Zodiac was interesting, or the Disciple was interesting
Mhm.
because, you know, it was basically like Hogan's little minion, and that's what he was. You know what I mean? So like, once again, you know, that plays into a bunch of it. Another one of Hogan's friendships that is famously a part of his, you know, entire history is him and Macho Man. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And like you said, he takes credit for a lot of Macho Man's success.
A rocky relationship.
A rocky relationship, to say the least. I
Yes.
mean, like, you know, to the point to where Macho blames Hogan and Linda for breaking up his marriage, and
Yes.
you know the infamous punch at WrestleMania 9 that we've you know
Yes.
we've talked about before, and just Hogan leaving and going to WCW, then Macho in a place in WWE where they're not going to use him as a wrestler anymore. So what does he do? He calls his old buddy Hulk Hogan, "Hey, let's meet at the gym. I'll bring a case of beer. We'll go talk this out."
Mhm.
Basically, and that's how he got his WCW deal. You know what I mean? So it's like, where would professional wrestling be if Hogan would have said, you know, "F you," or they weren't,
Right.
they had no connection at all. You know what I mean? And like he just snubbed him on it.
All right, it certainly could have been. I didn't know if you had any other in particular you wanted to get to. I know our time is beginning to run short, and
Yeah, we're coming. We got some minutes here. Let's see what we got here. I tell you one that I want to get to just because it means a lot to me is Trevor Murdoch and Lance Cade.
okay.
You know what I mean? Lance Cade, you know, started with Shawn Michaels's, you know, academy in Texas, and eventually, not long after, they made their way to Memphis.
Yes.
You know, so him and Spanky and American Dragon,
Dragon.
Shooter Schultz,
Mhm.
you know, that whole crop of guys
Made their way to Memphis.
made their way to Memphis and were in developmental. And I got to, you know, spend some time with them when they were here. And Lance was just a really nice guy. You know, obviously he looked just like Barry Windham. He had that same look. You know what I mean? I remember they put him and Tracy Smothers together as a tag team called TNT, Tennessee and Texas. You know what I mean? And I thought that was ingenious because that was good to put Tracy with him. You know what I mean?
A veteran.
But you know, obviously, you know, Lance Cade passed away several years ago, and Trevor is, you know, was probably his closest friend, and he actually named his son after Lance
Okay.
Cade. He named his son Cade. So that's just one for, you know, for us that, you know, means a lot to me because I you know, Trevor's a really good guy too. Me and him are friends. We talk every once in a while, and he just speaks with Lance with such reverence. You know.
Yes. All right. Was there anybody else in particular?
Yeah, let's get to Edge and Christian.
We would be remiss not to mention those two.
Yeah, so two
Growing
guys
up in Toronto.
you know, completely synonymous with each other. They said, and the thing is, they became friends because of a ninja star. I think is what they said.
Oh, okay.
Christian had a ninja star, and
Well,
like,
well, at that age, when they met, because they met in grade school.
yeah, they met when they were like 9.
Well, that's cool.
So yeah, that's cool. Hey, you got a ninja star? Let's go play with it. And that's the way friendship worked back when you were that age. There was no complicated rigmarole to it, was there? And they've become, once again, they become synonymous with themselves. You know what I mean? Like, you can't say Edge without saying Christian and vice versa. And then, a lot of their stuff has been tied together over the years. Obviously, Edge's ascent, as far as, like, when he became King of the Ring and Intercontinental Champion, all that kind of stuff, all that stuff was centered around his relationship with Christian. And then when Christian eventually won the world title from Randy Orton, same thing. Edge was right there, and that was part of the whole thing too. He was doing it, and he was doing it for remembrance of his friend Edge, who had to retire.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that was a huge deal.
Right. Yeah, their careers were undeniably intertwined. I didn't know if you had anybody else in particular, but one possible. The Shawn Michaels, Marty Jannetty, as they made their way to WWE, and then I don't know if they were ever legitimately great friends or not. I don't know that well.
I think they were actually like really, really good friends. Like, they just spent so much time together, and it just got to the point to where.
Well, that's what I wondered.
Marty, I follow Marty on Facebook, and it's ridiculous. Like, he says some of the most off the wall shit ever. You know what I mean? And like, I can't imagine, a company hiring him with some of the stuff that he says, you know what I mean? So,
sure.
And Shawn Michaels being the, guy that he was, I'm sure he thought, well, this guy's gonna, he's gonna anchor, he's gonna anchor me for sure if I do this. So,
well, as a fan, I just thought about the visual of the ending of a partnership or friendship as the tag team, so to speak. That's one of the moments in history that sticks out to me.
Well, that's one of the most iconic moments ever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Not just a breakup, but just an iconic moment in wrestling ever. I mean, I remember, being a kid going, "Holy!" He just threw him through a window.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That was, and the funny story about it is they say that can we get a little bit of color? And they're like, okay, yeah, you can get a little bit of color, and then they pull back and like Marty's just gushing, Yeah.
So give an inch, take a mile, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. But there's one last one we'll get to right quickly, and this one is, for my generation, probably in your generation, is probably a big one too. It's Ray, Eddie, Benoit, Malenko, and Jericho.
Absolutely.
And those guys were all, they basically traveled the world together, perfecting their professional wrestling craft. And then all of a sudden they all ended up in the same place at the same time, to make money. And that's an amazing thing to do with a group of friends,
Right. And, lots of difficult things involved with that group, but their impact was undeniable.
Absolutely. And obviously, Benoit was very, very upset when Eddie passed away. If you watch the Dark Side of the Ring, they go into that a little bit in depth as far as how much it actually had an effect on him. And then we eventually lost Benoit, obviously,
Yes.
and it could have led to that as well. That could have laid into it. So friendships right there, played a huge role in professional wrestling. And then Rey Mysterio ended up being the World Heavyweight Champion after Eddie died.
Kind of carrying the mantle.
Carrying the mantle, things like that. So all those things are always tied together and tied to friendship.
Absolutely. Yeah, he referenced Eddie frequently during his matches, and I believe I've seen Dominic do some of the same things. Kind of carry that on.
Yeah, the shake and all that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are over time. Not too bad. 33 minutes, 34 coming up on. Not bad.
Right.
Not bad. I think we had a really good topic today. I am your host, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and my co-host, my best friend, Mark Tipton. We're not hugging right now. We got a table separating us, just so anyone wants to say anything. My best friend, Mark Tipton. Thank you, and goodbye.